The moment Tessa Parker saw the bulldozer rolling toward her grandmother's apple orchard, something primal erupted inside her chest, and she was running before conscious thought caught up with her body. She planted herself directly in the machine's path, arms spread wide, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The driver's eyes went wide behind the glass, and he killed the engine, the sudden silence broken only by her ragged breathing and the wind rustling through leaves that had witnessed 70 years of her family's history. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice came from behind her, low and sharp as a knife edge. Tessa spun around to face the man striding toward her across the field. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. His jaw was set in a hard line, dark hair slightly tousled by the breeze, and his eyes were the color of steel in winter. He was unfairly handsome in a way that made her angrier. "Stopping you from destroying something that doesn't belong to you," she shot back, planting her feet more firmly in the dirt. "I have the deed that says otherwise." He stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest. "York Nielson, and you're trespassing. Trespassing." The word came out as a bitter laugh. "My grandmother worked this land for 50 years. I learned to walk in that orchard. And you think you can just roll in here with your money and your machines and erase all of that? I bought this property legally. The sale was final 3 weeks ago. From the bank who foreclosed on her, on a woman who's 83 years old and now living in a cramped apartment in town because she couldn't keep up with the loan payments after my grandfather died." Tessa's voice cracked and she hated herself for it. "You bought her home out from under her." Something flickered across York's face, too quick to read. "I'm sorry about your grandmother's circumstances, but business is business. I need this land for my development project." "Development project?" Tessa shook her head slowly. "Let me guess, luxury condos, a shopping center." "Something else this town doesn't need and can't afford. A manufacturing facility that will bring 300 jobs to this area. Jobs this town desperately needs, according to every economic report I've read." His voice remained level, but she caught the edge underneath. "Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property." "No, excuse me, I said no." Tessa lifted her chin. "You want to tear down my family's legacy, you're going to have to go through me first." York studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She became acutely aware of how she must look, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing old jeans and one of her grandfather's flannel shirts, dirt under her fingernails from helping her grandmother pack the last of her belongings yesterday. This man probably dealt with corporate lawyers in tailored suits and boardroom negotiations. She was nobody to him, just an obstacle to remove. "I don't want to call the police," he said finally. "Then don't. Just leave. This is my property. This is my history." They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. The construction crew had gathered at a distance, watching the standoff with obvious interest. York's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might actually have her removed. Instead, he pulled out his phone. "Everyone take an early lunch," he called out to the crew. "We'll resume in an hour." The workers didn't need to be told twice. They scattered toward their trucks, leaving Tessa and York alone in the field. He turned back to her, sliding the phone into his pocket. "You have 1 hour to say whatever it is you came here to say. Then you leave, or I will call the sheriff." "I don't need an hour. I need you to not destroy this place." "Not going to happen." "Why this land? There are other properties. Other locations that would work just as well for your factory. This property has the infrastructure I need. Access to the highway, existing electrical grid, water lines. It's the most logical choice." "Most logical?" Tessa laughed without humor. "Is that how you make all your decisions?" pure logic and profit margins. Generally, yes, it's worked well so far. You know what your problem is? She took a step closer. You see everything as a transaction. Buy this, build that, maximize returns. But you don't see the people. You don't see my grandmother crying when she handed over her keys. You don't see the memories in every tree of that orchard. I see a woman standing on property she doesn't own, trying to emotionally manipulate me into changing a business decision that will benefit hundreds of families in this community. His voice remained frustratingly calm. Your grandmother's situation is unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility. You're right. You have no responsibility to anyone but yourself and your bottom line. Tessa turned away, blinking back angry tears. I don't know why I bothered. She started walking toward the road where her truck was parked. She'd made it maybe 10 yards when his voice stopped her. What would satisfy you? Tessa turned slowly. What? York had his hands in his pockets, his expression still guarded, but something had shifted. Clearly, you're not going to let this go. And while I could have you arrested for trespassing, that would generate negative publicity I don't need right now. So what would satisfy you? What's the compromise here? There is no compromise. You can't half bulldoze a farm. No, but I might be able to preserve part of it. The orchard is on the eastern section of the property. My plans have the main facility on the western side. If I adjust the layout, I could potentially keep some of the trees. Tessa's heart jumped, but she forced herself to stay cautious. How many trees? I'd have to look at the plans. Maybe 20% of the orchard. That's not enough. It's more than you have right now, which is nothing. He pulled his phone out again, swiping through screens. Look, I have a meeting in Portland in 2 hours. I need to leave. But if you want to actually discuss this like adults instead of throwing yourself in front of heavy machinery, come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Where's your office? The old Morrison building downtown, 3rd floor. He was already walking toward a black SUV parked near the road. Don't be late. I don't do second appointments. Then he was gone, leaving Tessa standing in the field trying to figure out what had just happened. Part of her wanted to believe he was genuine about finding a compromise. The other part suspected this was just his way of getting her off the property today. Either way, she'd be at that office tomorrow morning. She owed her grandmother at least that much. Tessa spent the rest of the afternoon at the small apartment her grandmother now rented. A depressing 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old cooking and air freshener. Grammy sat in her favorite chair, the one thing she'd insisted on bringing from the farmhouse, looking small and tired in a way that made Tessa's chest ache. I confronted him, Tessa said, sitting down on the worn couch. The man who bought the farm. Grammy's eyebrows rose. Tessa Marie, you didn't. I stood in front of his bulldozer. Oh, honey. Grammy shook her head, but there was a hint of amusement in her faded blue eyes. You always were stubborn as your grandfather. What happened? He wants me to come to his office tomorrow. Says he might be able to save some of the orchard. Tessa picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion. I don't trust him. He's one of those billionaire types. Probably made his fortune stepping on people like us. Maybe. Or maybe he's just a man trying to do business. Grammy reached over and patted her hand. I know you're angry, sweetheart. I am too. But that farm, it was just land and trees. What matters is the love we shared there, the memories we made. Nobody can bulldoze those. It's not just land, Grammy, it's your legacy. Grandpa's legacy. My legacy is you, your mother, your cousins. The family we raised and loved. The farm was special, but it was never the point. Grammy squeezed her hand. That said, if you can save those trees, I won't complain. Your grandpa planted most of them himself. But don't go getting yourself arrested over it. Tessa laughed despite herself. I'll try my best. That night she lay in bed in her own small rental across town, staring at the ceiling and thinking about York Nielson. She'd done some research on her laptop after dinner. The man was more than just wealthy. He was Forbes' list wealthy. Self-made billionaire who'd started with one small manufacturing plant 15 years ago and built an empire of sustainable production facilities across the Pacific Northwest. Unmarried, notoriously private, known for being ruthless in business but fair with his employees. The articles painted him as some kind of enigma, a shark in environmentally friendly clothing. She'd also found photos. Professional shots from business conferences where he looked polished and remote in expensive suits. One casual shot from some charity event where he was actually almost smiling, and Tessa had stared at it longer than she wanted to admit. The man was objectively attractive. That didn't make him any less of a threat to her family's history. She showed up at the Morrison building at 8:45 the next morning, dressed in the closest thing she had to business attire, black slacks and a green sweater that brought out her eyes. The building was an old brick structure that had been recently renovated, the lobby all exposed beams and modern lighting. A directory by the elevator listed Nielson Industries on the 3rd floor. The elevator opened directly into a reception area that was surprisingly understated. Polished concrete floors, simple furniture, a few pieces of local art on the walls. A woman in her 50s sat behind the desk, looking up with a professional smile. "You must be Tessa Parker. Mr. Nielson is expecting you. Go ahead through that door." The door led to a hallway, and then to a corner office with windows overlooking Main Street. York was standing behind his desk, talking on his phone, and he gestured for her to come in and sit. Tessa took the opportunity to look around. The office was neat but not obsessive, with actual papers on the desk and bookshelves lined with binders and manufacturing manuals. A coffee maker sat on a side table, half a pot still warm. "No, tell them if they can't meet the environmental standards, we'll find another supplier." "I don't care if it costs more." York's voice was firm. "That's non-negotiable." "Right. Thanks, Marcus." He hung up and looked at Tessa. "Coffee, sure." She watched him pour 2 mugs, noting the casual efficiency of his movements. Today he wore dark slacks and a gray shirt, no tie. He looked like he belonged in this office, comfortable in his own space. He handed her a mug and sat down behind his desk, pulling up something on his computer screen. "I had my architect look at the property layout last night. If we shift the main building 30 feet west and reduce the parking lot size, we can preserve approximately 40% of the orchard." Tessa nearly spilled her coffee. 40%? You said 20 yesterday. Yesterday I was estimating. Today I have actual numbers. He turned the screen toward her, showing what looked like a site plan covered in colored zones and measurements. The trees here and here would stay. We'd actually incorporate them into the facility's green space, use them as part of the employee recreation area. She studied the plan, her mind racing. It wasn't everything, but it was substantial, more than she dared hope for. "What's the catch?" "No catch." "Well, one condition." York leaned back in his chair. "I need this project to have positive community support. Good press, local buy-in, that sort of thing. If I preserve the orchard, I want your grandmother to be present at the groundbreaking. Photo opportunity, maybe a short speech about honoring agricultural heritage while embracing industrial progress. You want to use her for publicity. I want to acknowledge that this land has history while moving forward with development that will help this town." Is that really so terrible? Tessa wanted to say yes, wanted to maintain her anger at this man who disrupted her grandmother's life. But looking at the site plan, seeing those trees marked for preservation, she couldn't find the words. This was a real compromise, more generous than she'd expected. I'll need to talk to my grandmother. Of course. Let me know by the end of the week. York closed his laptop. Was there anything else? Why are you doing this? You said yesterday that business is business. This is costing you money, changing your plans. Why do it? He was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Let's just say you made some valid points about seeing the people behind the transactions. And despite what you might think, I'm not actually trying to destroy anyone's legacy. Just their livelihood. Your grandmother sold to the bank when she took out the loan. The bank foreclosed when she couldn't pay. I bought from the bank. I'm not the villain in this story, Tessa. I'm just the next chapter. A chapter she didn't choose. Life rarely gives us the chapters we choose. We just have to make the best of the ones we get. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. End of the week. Let me know your grandmother's decision. Tessa stood too, but found herself hesitating. Those environmental standards you were talking about on the phone, you really won't compromise on them. Never. What's the point of bringing jobs to a community if you're poisoning their air and water in the process? He walked her to the door. I know you think I'm some heartless corporate robot, but I actually give a damn about the impact my business has on the world. That's not PR spin. It's just how I operate. She looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time without the filter of her anger. His eyes were tired around the edges, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of too many long days and not enough sleep. He was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe early 30s, closer to her own 27 than she'd realized. I'll talk to my grandmother, she said finally. Grammy agreed to the groundbreaking appearance without hesitation. If it saves those trees, I'll give a speech, plant a ceremonial shovel, whatever he needs, she said. Your grandpa would appreciate the gesture. Tessa called York's office and left a message with the receptionist. He called her back personally that evening while she was making dinner, her phone buzzing on the counter as she stirred pasta sauce. We have a deal then, he said when she confirmed Grammy's agreement. We have a deal. When's the groundbreaking? 3 weeks from tomorrow. I'll have my assistant send over the details. There was a pause. Thank you for being reasonable about this. Thank you for the compromise. I know it wasn't required. No, but it was right. Another pause. Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot. This project is going to take about 18 months to complete. It would be easier for everyone if we weren't enemies. I don't know if I'd say we were enemies. Adversaries, maybe. She heard the smile in his voice. Adversaries then. Think we could negotiate that down to neutral acquaintances. Despite herself, Tessa laughed. I suppose that's possible, though I make no promises about liking you. Fair enough. Have a good evening, Tessa. After he hung up, she stood in her kitchen stirring sauce and wondering why her heart was beating just a little bit faster than usual. It meant nothing. He was just being professional, trying to smooth over a potentially awkward ongoing relationship since the project was happening in her hometown. The fact that his voice had sounded warm and genuine on the phone was irrelevant. Over the next 3 weeks, Tessa found herself oddly aware of York's presence in town. She'd see his SUV parked outside the Morrison building when she drove past. Heard from friends that he was eating lunch at the diner on Main Street, actually talking to locals instead of hiding away. Someone mentioned seeing him at the hardware store, discussing water conservation techniques with old Mr. Peterson, who'd been running the place for 40 years. He's not what I expected, her friend Rachel said over coffee one afternoon. Rachel worked at the diner and had apparently served York multiple times. He's polite, tips well, asks about the specials like he actually cares. And have you seen him? The man is gorgeous. I haven't noticed, Tessa lied, liar. Everyone's noticed. Half the single women in town are suddenly eating lunch at the diner every day. Rachel grinned. Including you, apparently. This is your third time here this week. I like the pie, sure. Has nothing to do with the fact that Mr. Tall, Dark, and Billionaire comes in at noon every Tuesday and Thursday. Tessa threw a wadded napkin at her. I'm here on Wednesdays, completely different day. Today's Thursday. Is it? Tessa felt her face heat. I must have lost track. Uh-huh. Rachel's grin widened. For what it's worth, I think he notices you too. Last week when you were here, he kept looking over at your table. Very subtle, but I noticed things. He was probably making sure I wasn't going to throw myself in front of any more of his equipment. But later, walking back to her truck, Tessa caught her reflection in a store window and realized she'd worn her nicest jeans and actually put on makeup that morning. She groaned at herself. This was ridiculous. So what if York Nielson was attractive and apparently not a complete monster? He was still a billionaire who'd bought her grandmother's farm. They were from completely different worlds. After the groundbreaking, she'd probably never see him again. The thought sat uncomfortably in her chest. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on a bright Thursday morning, unseasonably warm for March. Someone had set up a small podium decorated with hard hats and shovels tied with ribbons. Local press was there, including the newspaper editor and a crew from the regional news station. Tessa stood with Grammy near the front, watching as York took the podium. He looked different today, more formal in a dark suit, his hair neatly styled. But when he spoke, his voice was genuine, not rehearsed. He talked about economic development and environmental responsibility, about honoring the past while building the future. Then he invited Grammy up to the podium. Tessa held her breath as her grandmother approached the microphone, but Grammy was steady and clear. She talked about working the land with her husband, about the years of harvest and hard work and love that had gone into the farm. She talked about change being hard but necessary, and about gratitude that part of the orchard would remain. These trees were planted by my Harold 50 years ago, Grammy said, gesturing toward the preserved section. And they'll be here long after I'm gone, growing and living and bearing fruit. That's legacy enough for me. I'm grateful to Mr. Nielson for making sure they survive. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd by the time she finished. York helped her down from the podium, his hand gentle on her elbow, and Tessa saw him say something quietly that made Grammy smile and pat his cheek. Then Grammy was walking toward Tessa, and York was handling the ceremonial groundbreaking, posing for photos with local officials and business leaders. He's a good man, Grammy said quietly, taking Tessa's arm. Reminds me a bit of your grandfather, actually. Serious on the outside but kind underneath. Grammy, don't start matchmaking. I'm not matchmaking, just making an observation. But her eyes twinkled with mischief. The ceremony wrapped up and the crowd began dispersing. Tessa was helping Grammy to the car when York appeared beside them. Mrs. Parker, that was a beautiful speech. Thank you for being here. Thank you for saving my trees, young man. Grammy squeezed his hand. It means more than you know. It was the right thing to do. York turned to Tessa. Could I talk to you for a minute? Tessa got Grammy settled in the car, then walked back to where York waited, hands in his pockets, looking oddly uncertain for a billionaire who commanded rooms full of executives. I wanted to apologize, he said. For what? For the way I handled our first meeting. I was dismissive of your concerns, treated the situation as purely transactional when it obviously meant much more to you and your family. He met her eyes directly. I'm good at business. I'm not always good at people. I'm sorry. Tessa found herself suddenly off balance. An apology was the last thing she'd expected. Thank you, and I'm sorry for almost getting myself arrested on your property. It was memorable if nothing else. His mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I was wondering if you might want to have coffee sometime. To discuss the project, local concerns, that sort of thing. It would be helpful to have community input as we move forward. Coffee, for community input." "That's the professional reason, yes." He held her gaze. "The personal reason is that I'd like to get to know you better, if you're interested." Tessa's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I thought billionaires didn't date small-town girls who throw themselves in front of bulldozers. I thought small-town girls didn't date billionaires who bought their grandmother's farms." Adversaries to neutral acquaintances to coffee dates. That's quite a progression. Is that a yes? She should say no. This was a terrible idea for approximately 1,000 reasons. But standing there in the spring sunshine, looking up at him and seeing genuine interest and vulnerability in his expression, she found herself saying, "Yes, coffee sounds good." His smile, real and warm and transforming his entire face, made her breath catch. "Tomorrow. There's a place called The Grind that makes excellent lattes, according to my assistant. I know it. I'll meet you there at 10. She walked back to the car feeling Grammy's knowing gaze but refusing to acknowledge it. It was just coffee. A getting-to-know-you conversation between two people who'd gotten off on the wrong foot and were trying to be civil. The fact that her pulse was racing, and she was already mentally reviewing her wardrobe, meant absolutely nothing. The Grind was a small coffee shop tucked into a converted house on a quiet street. Tessa arrived 5 minutes early, saw York already there through the window, and had to take a deep breath before going inside. He was sitting at a table by the window, wearing jeans and a dark blue sweater that made his eyes look impossibly intense. He stood when she entered, and she noticed other customers watching them with obvious curiosity. "Small town," she said apologetically as she sat down. "We're probably going to end up as gossip by lunchtime. Is that a problem? Not for me, but you might end up fielding questions about your intentions toward the local girls." "My intentions are entirely honorable." He signaled the barista. "What would you like?" They ordered lattes and sat across from each other, the initial conversation awkward as they navigated the space between professional acquaintances, and whatever this was becoming. York asked about her work, and she told him about managing the community recreation center, organizing youth sports leagues and after-school programs. He seemed genuinely interested, asking follow-up questions about funding and community involvement. "It's not glamorous," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "But it matters. A lot of these kids don't have much. The rec center gives them a safe place, positive activities, adult mentors. We're making a difference even if it's just in small ways." "I don't think those differences are small at all." York leaned back in his chair. "You're building community, giving kids opportunities they might not otherwise have. That's exactly the kind of thing that matters most," says the man building a manufacturing facility. "Hey, 300 jobs matter too. But I'll admit it's different. I'm good at systems and logistics and profit margins. You're good at people and community and making actual human connections." He paused. "I envy that sometimes. The direct impact, seeing the faces of the people you help." "You could do that too. You're choosing to eat at the local diner, shop at the hardware store. People are noticing. That's just common sense. If I want this community to accept my facility, I need to be part of the community." But there was something in his voice that suggested it was more than just strategy. They talked for 2 hours, the conversation flowing easier as time went on. Tessa learned that York had grown up in a small town himself, the son of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. He'd put himself through state college, started his first business with a loan and a prayer, nearly lost everything twice before finding success. The wealth was relatively recent, the Forbes list status only about 5 years old. "I remember what it's like to struggle," he said quietly. "That's why I focus on sustainable manufacturing, fair wages, environmental responsibility. I could make more money cutting corners, but I've been on the bottom. I know what it costs people when businesses only care about profit." "So you're not actually a heartless billionaire robot?" "Not entirely. Maybe 70% robot, 30% human," Tessa laughed. "I'd say the ratio might be more balanced than you think." When they finally left the coffee shop, York walked her to her truck. The spring air was sweet, the street quiet, and Tessa found herself reluctant for the morning to end. "I enjoyed this," York said, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, something understated and woodsy. "Would you want to do it again? Maybe dinner next time?" "Like a date, not a professional community input date, exactly like a date." His eyes searched hers. "I know this is complicated, but I'd really like to see where this might go, if you're willing." Tessa thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. The fact that he'd bought her grandmother's farm, the wealth disparity between them, the likelihood that he'd eventually leave town and she'd be left with a broken heart. But she also thought about the way he'd listened to her talk about the rec center, genuinely interested in her work. The way he'd been gentle with Grammy at the groundbreaking, the vulnerability in his eyes right now, waiting for her answer. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." Their first official date was dinner at a restaurant one town over, a little Italian place where they were less likely to be recognized and gossiped about. York was a gentleman, opening doors and pulling out her chair, but not in a performative way. It felt natural, like he'd been raised to treat people well and never unlearned it. Over pasta and wine, they continued the conversation from the coffee shop, diving deeper into their histories and dreams. Tessa talked about her parents' divorce when she was 10, how she'd spent summers at the farm with Grammy and Grandpa, those lazy days in the orchard becoming her refuge. York told her about his mother dying when he was 25, just as his business was starting to succeed, and the guilt of not being able to give her the comfortable life she deserved. "She would have been proud of you," Tessa said softly. "I hope so. She always told me to work hard but stay kind. I try to honor both parts of that advice, though the kindness doesn't always come naturally in the business world. I think you're kinder than you give yourself credit for." The look he gave her was intense enough to make her breath catch. They talked until the restaurant was closing, then sat in his car in the parking lot for another hour, neither wanting the night to end. When he finally drove her back to her truck, he walked her to the door and hesitated. "I'd really like to kiss you," he said, "but I don't want to rush anything." Tessa's heart was pounding. "I'd like that too. The kissing, not the rushing." He smiled, then leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, soft and careful and achingly sweet. It was a perfect first kiss, gentle and exploratory, ending far too soon but leaving her wanting more. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire but also something softer. "I'll call you," he said. "You better." He did call the very next day. They went out again that weekend and then twice the following week. Tessa found herself thinking about him constantly, checking her phone for his messages, smiling at random moments when something reminded her of him. It was terrifying and exhilarating and utterly consuming. Rachel cornered her at the rec center one afternoon, arms crossed and expression knowing. "So you're dating the billionaire. The whole town knows. We've gone on a few dates." "A few dates. Right. You're glowing, Tessa. You smile at your phone like a teenager. You wore a dress to work yesterday, and I've never seen you in anything but jeans in the 5 years I've known you." Tessa felt her face heat. "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, it's so obvious I'm surprised there aren't cartoon hearts floating around your head." Rachel's expression softened. I'm happy for you. He seems like a good guy, but be careful, okay? Men like that, they live different lives than us. Eventually, he's going to go back to that world. I know. We're just seeing where it goes. No expectations. But that was a lie. She already had expectations, hopes, dreams that involved York in ways that scared her with their intensity. And from the way he looked at her, held her hand like it was something precious, kissed her good night like he was drowning and she was air, she suspected he felt it too. They were sitting on a bench overlooking the river one evening, about 6 weeks into whatever this was, when York said, I need to tell you something. Tessa's stomach dropped. Here it came, the other shoe dropping, the reality check. Okay. I'm falling in love with you. He said it simply, like he was stating a fact rather than something that made her entire world tilt sideways. I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring this out, but I'm not good at pretending or playing games. I think about you constantly. You make me laugh, make me see the world differently. And I'm terrified because I've never felt like this before, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Tessa stared at him, this powerful man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, looking at her with such open vulnerability that her chest ached. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. And it's terrifying. Why? Because you're you and I'm me, and our lives are so different. Because eventually this construction project will end and you'll move on to the next one, the next town. Because I'm scared of needing you and then losing you. York took both her hands in his. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, I have other projects, other facilities to oversee, but this is my primary focus for the next 18 months, and after that, I don't know, but I know I don't want to lose you. We'll figure it out together. Promise. I promise. He kissed her softly. I'm not running away from this, Tessa. I'm fighting to make it work. She kissed him back, deeper this time, pouring everything she felt into it. They stayed by the river until the stars came out, talking about the future in careful, hopeful terms, neither quite daring to believe this could actually work, but both too invested to walk away. As spring turned to summer, they fell into a rhythm. York was busy with the construction project, often working 12-hour days, but he made time for her. They had standing dinner dates every Tuesday and Thursday, and he'd show up at the rec center on Saturday mornings to help with whatever projects needed doing. The kids loved him, and Tessa would watch him patiently teaching 8-year-olds how to shoot baskets or helping teenagers build sets for the summer theater program, and fall even more deeply in love. He took her to Portland one weekend, showing her the penthouse apartment where he technically lived but rarely stayed. It was beautiful in an impersonal way, all clean lines and expensive furniture, and she couldn't really imagine him there. It doesn't feel like you, she said, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city. That's because it's not really me. It's where I sleep between projects. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. I've been thinking about that, actually. About what home means. And I think it might be wherever you are. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. York, I can't ask you to give up your life, your business. You're not asking. I'm choosing. I can run my company from anywhere with internet access. And I've realized I actually like your small town. It reminds me of where I grew up before I got caught up in the hustle of building an empire. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I love you, Tessa. I want to build a life with you if you want that too. I do. She kissed him, hard and fierce. I really do. They spent that weekend in Portland, mostly in his apartment, discovering each other in new and intimate ways. York was tender and passionate, attentive to her needs, and Tessa felt like she was finally understanding what it meant to be truly known by another person. They talked about their future in more concrete terms now. where they'd live, how they'd balance his business with her work, the possibility of starting a family someday. "I want kids," York said, lying beside her with his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "2 or 3. I want them to grow up knowing they're loved with both parents present. Everything I didn't have. I want that too." Tessa pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Though we should probably get married first," Grammy would insist. "Consider it planned. I'll propose properly soon with a ring and romance and everything. But know that I'm going to marry you, Tessa Parker. That's not a question. That's a promise." When they drove back Sunday evening, Tessa felt like a different person, more complete, more certain of her place in the world. She'd found her person, and despite all the obstacles that should have kept them apart, they'd chosen each other. The construction project hit its 6-month mark, and the facility was starting to take real shape. York invited Grammy and Tessa out for a tour, showing them the preserved orchard section that had been incorporated into the employee recreational area. The trees were thriving, bearing apples that would be ready for harvest in another few weeks. "We're going to have an annual harvest festival for employees and their families," York explained, walking them through the space. "I thought we could make it a celebration of the land's agricultural heritage while creating new traditions for the facility." Grammy patted his arm. "You're doing good work here, York. Harold would approve." That evening, after taking Grammy home, York drove Tessa to the orchard. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and pink, and the air smelled like apples and earth. He led her to the oldest tree, the one Grammy said had been the first her husband planted. "This tree has seen a lot of history," York said, taking her hands. 50 years of seasons, of harvests, of the love your grandparents shared. I want to add to that history." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Tessa's hand flew to her mouth, tears already starting. "Tessa Parker, you changed my life the moment you threw yourself in front of my bulldozer. You challenged me, saw past the money and the business to the person underneath, and loved him anyway. You made me believe in home again, in building something that matters more than profit margins. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, building a family in this town you love, creating new memories while honoring the past." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" "Yes." The word came out as a sob. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring on her finger, then stood and kissed her as the last light faded from the sky. They held each other under the apple trees, surrounded by history and the promise of their future, and Tessa felt the rightness of it in her bones. This was where she belonged. This man was her home. The engagement sparked celebration throughout the town. Everyone had been watching their relationship develop, and the general consensus was that York had turned out to be one of the good ones. He'd kept his promises about environmental standards and fair wages, and the facility was already bringing new economic life to the area. He'd also continued being present in the community, joining the Chamber of Commerce, sponsoring youth sports leagues, eating breakfast at the diner, and actually learning people's names. They set the wedding for the following spring, wanting to wait until the facility was fully operational so York could relax and enjoy the celebration. The engagement period was a blur of happiness and planning and building their life together. York bought a house on the edge of town, a craftsman-style place with good bones that needed work. They spent weekends renovating it together, painting walls and refinishing floors and arguing affectionately about tile choices. "I never thought I'd be the type to care about subway tiles versus hexagons," York said one Saturday, covered in grout dust. "But here we are. Welcome to domestic life." Tessa kissed his cheek, leaving a paint smear from her brush. "You're stuck with me now. Best decision I ever made." The facility had its official opening in November, a huge event with state officials and business leaders. But York insisted on having a separate celebration just for the community, a potluck dinner in the employee cafeteria where locals could tour the facility and see what they'd helped build. He gave credit generously, thanking everyone from the construction crews to the small businesses who'd supported the project to Tessa for her community insights. "And special thanks to Mrs. Dorothy Parker," he said, gesturing to where Grammy sat near the front. "Without her family's stewardship of this land, none of this would be possible. The orchard you see preserved here is a testament to the generations who worked this soil. We're honored to continue that legacy." The applause was thunderous. Later, as people mingled and toured the facility, Tessa watched York patiently answer questions and shake hands and connect with people, and felt almost overwhelmed with love. He'd learned to balance both sides of himself, the brilliant businessman and the kind man who genuinely cared about people. "You did good, sweetheart," Grammy said, appearing at her elbow. "That man adores you, and he's made something good here, honored the past while building the future. That's all anyone can ask." Winter passed in a cozy blur. They spent their first Christmas together in their still unfinished house, sitting on the floor in front of the fireplace eating takeout because they hadn't unpacked the kitchen boxes yet. It was perfect. York gave her a framed photo of her grandparents standing in the orchard, taken decades ago, along with a new photo of her and Grammy under the same trees. The caption read, "Legacy." "I wanted you to see both versions," he said softly, "the history and the continuation. You're carrying forward everything they built." Tessa gave him a leather-bound journal filled with her handwritten notes. All the things she loved about him, memories from their relationship, dreams for their future. He read it with tears in his eyes, pulling her close and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Spring arrived with an explosion of blossoms, and suddenly, the wedding was upon them. They'd kept it relatively simple, a ceremony in the town's historic church, followed by a reception in the facility's event space, under the apple trees they'd saved together. Tessa wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and walked down the aisle to find York waiting with such love in his eyes that she nearly forgot to breathe. They wrote their own vows. Tessa promised to challenge him, support his dreams, and always remind him that life was about more than profit margins. York promised to honor her roots, build a life worth living, and love her with everything he had. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. The reception was a celebration that lasted well into the night. They danced under string lights in the orchard, surrounded by everyone who mattered, the air sweet with apple blossoms and joy. Grammy danced with York, telling him stories about his new grandfather-in-law, and Tessa watched them with a full heart. "This is perfect," she told him later, slow dancing as the party wound down around them. "Everything I never knew I wanted. Just wait until the honeymoon." He grinned, then grew more serious. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, for seeing past the bulldozers and business plans to the man underneath. You saved me in more ways than you know. You saved me too, gave me a future I was afraid to dream about." They honeymooned in Italy, 2 weeks of wine and pasta and exploring ancient cities. But they were both ready to come home when the time came, eager to start their real married life in the town they loved. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to navigate shared space and merged lives, but the foundation of their relationship was solid. York continued running his business from their home office, traveling occasionally but always returning within a few days. Tessa got a promotion at the rec center, expanding programs and bringing in new funding. They built a life that was full and purposeful, rooted in community and each other. 2 years after their wedding, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. York's reaction was everything she'd hoped, pure joy and wonder and a little bit of terror. They painted the nursery together, arguing affectionately about color schemes just like they had with the house. They took classes on childbirth and parenting, and York read every book he could find on being a good father. "I'm going to mess this up," he said one night, his hand on her swollen belly feeling their daughter kick. "I don't know how to do this. Nobody does. We'll figure it out together." She covered his hand with hers. "Just love her and be present. That's all any kid really needs." Their daughter, Emma, was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with a full head of dark hair and her father's intense eyes. York held her like she was made of glass, tears streaming down his face, and Tessa fell in love with him all over again watching him become a father. Grammy was a frequent visitor, delighted with her great-granddaughter, often sitting in the nursery's rocking chair telling stories about the old farm. Emma's first word was tree, said while pointing at the orchard visible through the window, and they all took it as a sign of the legacy continuing. York proved to be a natural father, patient and involved and completely smitten. He adjusted his work schedule to be home for bedtime every night, took Emma to the orchard on weekends to play among the trees, and talked to her constantly, even though she couldn't yet understand. Watching him with their daughter, Tessa sometimes couldn't believe this was her life. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, James, who had his mother's smile and his father's stubborn determination. Their house was chaos now, full of toys and laughter and the beautiful mess of family life. York scaled back his business even more, promoting trusted executives to handle day-to-day operations while he focused on strategic planning he could do from home. "I don't want to miss this," he told Tessa one night after they'd finally gotten both kids to bed. "The empire can wait." "They're only little once. No regrets?" she asked. "About leaving the high-powered CEO life behind, are you kidding? This is everything I ever wanted. You, the kids, this town, this life." He pulled her close. "I was lonely for years and didn't even realize it. Now I'm surrounded by love every single day. That's worth more than any amount of money." They'd been married 5 years when Grammy passed away peacefully in her sleep, just shy of her 90th birthday. The funeral was well attended, everyone in town coming to pay respects to the woman who'd been part of the community's fabric for so long. York gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears, talking about how Grammy had welcomed him into the family despite his rocky start, taught him about legacy and love, and given him the greatest gift in her granddaughter. After the funeral, they took Emmy and James to the orchard. The kids ran through the trees while York and Tessa stood holding hands, remembering. "She was happy at the end," Tessa said softly. "She got to see us married, meet her great-grandkids, watch the farm become something new but still connected to the past. That's all she wanted. She was an incredible woman. I'm grateful I got to know her." York squeezed her hand. "She'd be proud of you, of everything you've built. We built it together." They scattered some of Grammy's ashes under the oldest apple tree, the one where York had proposed, continuing the cycle of life and memory that defined this place. Emma, now 5, picked an apple and held it carefully. "Great Grammy's tree," she said solemnly. "That's right, baby," Tessa said, hugging her daughter close. "And someday you'll tell your children about her, about this orchard, about all the love that grew here." Life continued in its beautiful, messy way. The rec center expanded, adding new programs that Tessa developed and implemented. York's company continued thriving, now known nationwide for sustainable manufacturing and exceptional employee treatment. They added to their house, creating more space for their growing family and the life they were building. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they threw a party in the orchard, inviting everyone who'd been part of their journey. The facility was well established now, a cornerstone of the local economy, and the preserved orchard had become a beloved community space. They'd started hosting the harvest festival York had envisioned, an annual celebration that brought together employees, families, and the wider community. Standing under the apple trees with their children running around and their friends celebrating nearby, York pulled Tessa close. 10 years ago, I was just a businessman looking for land to develop. Then you threw yourself in front of my bulldozer and changed everything. Tessa laughed. Best worst decision I ever made. You fought me every step of the way. Made me see beyond profit and logistics to the people and history that mattered. You made me better. You fought your feelings and lost. I'm glad you did. So am I. He kissed her softly. Here's to the next 10 years and the 10 after that, and every decade we get together. Forever sounds good to me. They stood there as the sun set over the orchard, surrounded by the life they'd built together from conflict and compromise, from initial antagonism to deep and abiding love. The apple trees that had started it all continued their steady growth, bearing fruit season after season, a living testament to the truth that the best things in life come from planting seeds and nurturing them with patience and care. Emma ran up, grass-stained and happy, demanding to know when they'd cut the anniversary cake. James followed, chattering about the treehouse he wanted York to build. Tessa and York exchanged a look of perfect understanding, that silent communication of long-married couples who know each other completely. This was their legacy. Not the manufacturing facility or the preserved orchard or any physical thing, but the love they shared and passed down to their children. The community they'd built, the lives they'd touched, the way they'd chosen each other every day for 10 years and would continue choosing each other for all the years to come. As they walked hand in hand toward the celebration, their children dancing ahead of them, Tessa thought about that first day when she'd stood in front of York's bulldozer, angry and desperate to save her grandmother's farm. She'd seen him as the enemy then, the rich outsider who would destroy everything she loved. She couldn't have imagined that he would become her home, her partner, the father of her children, and the love of her life. But that was the thing about love. It showed up in unexpected places, in conflict and challenge and opposition. It grew from rocky soil, flourished despite obstacles, and bore fruit sweeter than any orchard could produce. She'd fought him, and he'd fought his feelings, and they'd both lost and won simultaneously. The party continued late into the night, filled with laughter and music and the warmth of community. York gave a toast thanking everyone for being part of their story, and Tessa watched him with that same overwhelming love she'd felt on their wedding day, now deepened and enriched by a decade of shared life. Later, much later after the guests had gone and the kids were asleep and they were alone in the quiet house, Tessa and York sat on their back porch overlooking the land that had brought them together. "I love you," York said simply, pulling her close. "I love you too. Today, tomorrow, always." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance across the yard, the orchard a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. Somewhere in those trees was the history of her grandparents' love, the legacy of hard work and dedication that had shaped her. But there was also the future, the continuing story of the land and the people who cared for it. York had honored his promise. The facility brought jobs and prosperity while respecting the past. The orchard survived and thrived, now enjoyed by a whole new generation. And more importantly, he'd built a life with her that was rooted in love and community, proving that success wasn't measured only in dollars but in relationships and legacy, and the positive impact you left on the world. Their children would grow up knowing both sides of their heritage. The agricultural roots represented by the orchard, the stories of great-Grammy and great-grandpa working the land, and the innovation and growth represented by the facility, the jobs it provided, the way new and old could coexist and strengthen each other. Emma had already announced she wanted to be a farmer when she grew up, while James was fascinated by the manufacturing process and loved touring the facility with his father. Both futures were possible, both paths honored. That was the gift Tessa and York were giving their children. Options, opportunities, and the understanding that you could honor the past while building something new. "What are you thinking about?" York asked, noticing her contemplative silence. "Just how perfect this all is. How grateful I am that you were stubborn enough to buy that farm and I was stubborn enough to fight you about it. Our stubbornness has served us well. It really has." She turned to face him, cupping his jaw with her hand. "Thank you for seeing me that day. For listening, compromising, being willing to change your plans. For fighting your feelings and loving me anyway. Loving you was never the fight. It was the easiest thing I've ever done." He kissed her palm. "Fighting the fear, opening myself up to the possibility of this kind of happiness, that was the battle. But you made it worth every moment of vulnerability." They kissed in the moonlight, a kiss that held 10 years of history and a lifetime of promises. When they finally headed inside, Tessa took one last look at the orchard, those steadfast trees that had witnessed so much love and would stand witness to so much more. This was home. Not just the physical place, but the life they'd created, the family they were raising, the love that bound it all together. She'd set out to save her grandmother's farm and ended up finding so much more. A partner who challenged and supported her, a love that was both fierce and gentle. A future bright with possibility. York took her hand as they climbed the stairs, and Tessa felt the solid, constant warmth of his presence. This man who'd arrived as a threat and become her everything. Who'd bought her grandmother's farm and given her a family. Who'd built an empire but found his greatest success in the simple act of coming home each night to the people who loved him. They checked on the children. Emma sprawled across her bed with her stuffed animals, James curled up clutching his favorite book. Then they retreated to their own room, to the bed they shared and the life they'd built together, one day and one choice and one act of love at a time. "Happy anniversary," York whispered, holding her close in the darkness. "Happy anniversary," she replied. "Here's to forever." And forever, she thought as sleep pulled her under, would be just long enough to love this man the way he deserved, to build the life they'd started, to watch their children grow and add their own chapters to the orchard story, to prove that sometimes the best things came from fighting for what you believed in and being brave enough to lose the fight against love. The apple trees would stand. The facility would thrive. Their children would grow strong and kind. And through it all, she and York would walk together, hand in hand, building their legacy one moment at a time. Not in grand gestures or billion-dollar deals, but in quiet mornings and family dinners and goodnight kisses and the steady, enduring choice to love each other through everything. That was the real happy ending. Not a moment frozen in time, but a continuing story, always growing, always changing, always rooted in the love that had brought them together and would hold them close for all the years to come. She'd fought the billionaire who bought her grandmother's farm. He'd fought his feelings and lost. And in losing, they'd both won everything that truly mattered.